You're listening to In the Fast Lane. This is episode number 8 of the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix. My name is Matt Clayton, and this week we're going to take a look back at the first 6 races of this very unusual Formula 1 season and what they've told us about what might happen next. And we'll take a trip down memory lane as well with a very special guest, 2009 World Champion and 3-time Australian Grand Prix winner, Jensen Button. Of course, on 2 wheels, we had the Styrian Grand Prix last Sunday at the Red Bull Ring for the second time in 7 days, and it was oh so close for Australia's Jack Miller. The Pramac Ducati rider was beaten at the last corner of the last lap by KTM's Miguel Oliveira, with Jack holding off Pol Espargaro for a superb second place. He's now up to 3rd in the World Championship after 2 podiums in as many weeks. It was Oliveira's maiden MotoGP win. That's 3 first-time winners in the opening 5 races of the season. And it came after the race was red flagged when Maverick Vinales had to jump from his bike when it ran out of brakes into the first corner. Fortunately, no injury there for the Yamaha rider, but a pretty scary incident nonetheless. Also on the podium in Moto2 was Remy Gardner in 3rd place, so a great weekend for the Australian riders in Austria. But back to 4 wheels. A whole lot more has happened since we finally got this season underway in Austria in July. And the man in the co-host chair to help me talk about all of that, unfortunately, just missed out on a place in the list of F1's fastest drivers of the past 40 years. It's Michael Laminato. Hello, Michael.
Yes, unlucky 11th for me, unfortunately. Just off the list published online, but, as long as people know, then I'm happy.
Well, given it's based on ideal qualifying laps, I'm so slow that I'm still completing mine, so I'm hoping to slot in at about 332nd or thereabouts. But what we do know is that we're 6 races into a season that we know is going to last at least 13, up to the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola on November the 1st. But it's looking very much like we'll get 4 races after that, and it seems that there's another former F1 venue, and one of the very good ones in the mix, doesn't it?
Yeah, the Turkish Grand Prix, unless they come up with another exciting name, as there has been the trend this year. It looks like it's ready to come back at Istanbul, and of course, everyone just remembers, is it Turn 8? The name doesn't even have a name, does it?
No, it's very boring, but it's a fantastic corner. It's a quadruple apex, flat-out left-hander. I did wince when I heard one of the drivers say that they thought it would be easy flat, note hyphen there, for a modern-day Formula 1 car, but it is a fantastic circuit. It usually threw up some good races, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people will, of course, remember most infamously the collision between Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber, if you want to call it diplomatically, without saying who hit who. That's the way you would probably present that. And one of the better circuits designed by F1's favoured circuit designer, Herman Tilke, as well. You can see some of those aspects of that track that have sort of been translated into other tracks he subsequently designed. A couple of aspects made their way to the Circuit of the Americas, for example. Part of the reason why I think that circuit is quite a good track as well. So it'll be really interesting to see. And I think also the fact that circuit, as I understand it, is very rarely used these days, obviously not for a long time by Formula 1, but in general means it'll be a real big learning curve, I think, for everybody.
No, look, it is a fantastic layout. We've not gone there since 2011. It seems more recently than that. There was some discussion that Jerez might get a spot on the calendar, but that seems unlikely. It looks like we're going to finish with 2 races in Bahrain and 1 in Abu Dhabi for a mid-December finish. But Bahrain could be interesting. We could have the usual Bahrain circuit and then what they're calling the, quote, almost oval circuit, which is sort of like a square with a few squiggly bits. But that'll be an interesting race, given that we've not raced on that. No one's tested on that. It's almost a bit like the oval situation that we see in the US, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also, I enjoyed when that was floated. I think it was Ross Brawn who sort of speculatively floated it quite a long time ago, actually, when they were still piecing the calendar together. And a lot of people were like, is there even an oval circuit in Bahrain? Most people hadn't even heard of it. But it's one of those constructions there of a racetrack where there are all these different configurations. Maybe even the promoter there forgot that they had it, because I'm not sure how often it's used. But it will be a completely, dramatically different challenge to what the current Bahrain circuit is. It's going to be much shorter. It's going to be incredibly quick. If in fact that's the final configuration they use, they might come up with something more intermediate than that. But that would be, essentially a new circuit, I think. And on a calendar now that's got a couple of, not new circuits, but new in the grand scheme of Formula 1 of the last 5 or 10 years. Another very interesting addition.
Very much so. That's one for down the track in late November, it seems. But closer to home, we've got the Belgian Grand Prix coming up this coming weekend, and an announcement that there's going to be a crackdown on engine modes, which has certainly favoured the Mercedes-powered teams over the past few years. In your view, Michael, is that going to change anything for both qualifying and also the knock-on effect of the race themselves, or is it going to be much of the same?
You wouldn't be too optimistic that it's going to change a lot in the grand scheme of things, would you? But, theoretically, on the surface reading of this, you'd think that Mercedes will be slowed down a bit in qualifying at least, because we know that, especially by the time they get to Q3, the margin is approaching 1 second in the last couple of Grand Prix, which is pretty absurd when you think about how big an advantage that is. But even then, Toto Wolff came out after this week and said they weren't even pushing the engine 100%, which is extremely concerning to me. And then you have to consider the idea that if this rule is aimed at making one engine mode for qualifying and the race, when you average that out, sort of the peak power mode and let's say the reduced mode they would have been using in the race, it actually means in the race they get quicker. And it's not as though they're not very quick in the race at the moment. So you would have to say that on balance, this might actually backfire in a sense and mean Mercedes gets a little bit faster.
That change to engine modes looks like it'll be coming in for the Italian Grand Prix at Monza in a couple of weeks' time, so not for Belgium this coming Sunday. That's one for the future, but for now we're 6 races into what looks to be a 17-race calendar, which is close enough to the 1/3 marker of the season to have a pretty good read on the state of play in the World Championship and some of the biggest talking points. We'll get to those, amongst other things, with this week's special guest. Joining us on this week's episode of In the Fast Lane, he's a driver who has plenty of links to the Australian Grand Prix. He made his F1 debut in Melbourne 20 years ago, and 3 of his 15 career wins came at Albert Park, including one in 2009, the year he became World Champion. It's a very warm welcome to Jensen Button. JB, hello.
How's it going?
Going very well, thank you. Very strange year for all of us, of course. We've had a race calendar this year that wasn't what any of us would have imagined. You've been one of the few people actually on the ground at several races in your role for Sky Sports. Tell us about the whole experience of being in that paddock and the way the sport has to work this year. I guess in the circumstances, it's massively impressive from just a logistical point of view, isn't it?
It is, and the issue is we're on air wearing face masks, 2 meters apart from each other, doing interviews, and I get that it looks weird, and I get that people think it's overkill, but it's the only way that we can go motor racing. So I think it's totally worth it to be able to bring Formula One to the world. It's so worth it to have those restrictions, and totally understandable as well. But it's funny in the paddock because it's empty. You've got the racing drivers, you've got the mechanics and the physios and the engineers, and you've got a handful of film crews walking around, and that's it. No, the journos can't even get in the paddock. So it's a strange atmosphere, but as I know as drivers, they are going about it exactly the same as before. The only thing that's different for them is obviously arriving, seeing all the fans, that amazing atmosphere, and going out on the driver's parade, waving at the fans. Once you get into the car, you are fully focused, and you're not thinking about anything else. You have to be focused. So in terms of the drivers and what they're doing and what they're achieving, it's exactly the same.
Sure, the masks certainly do look different, as you say, but once they get in the car, it is the same. So much so that you've got to say the performance balance this season is not even so different to the last, 6 or 7, really. I feel like every year at the end of a season, we feel like there's a lot of potential for a close following year, and it doesn't seem to eventuate, does it? On your reading of it, is it Mercedes taking another big step forward this year, or is it the rivals Red Bull Racing and, obviously Ferrari taking some serious steps backwards?
Yeah, it's tough, I know, for the fans of the sport. If you're a fan of Mercedes, it's great. It couldn't be any better. But I still think even if you are a fan of Mercedes, you still want great racing. And sometimes it's been difficult to commentate and be a pundit on the sport when there's 2 cars out front just walking away with it. They've dominated the hybrid era, since 2014. Some people have come close, teams have come close to challenging them, but you seriously have to do a good job to challenge Mercedes at the moment, and nobody has done a good enough job. I think Silverstone was a standout race. It was very, very hot. They were having tire issues. So for Max and Red Bull to win that, I think it was a shock to them as well to even challenge the Mercedes. They were a second slower in qualifying. It's too big a gap, but it's not Mercedes' fault. They're doing a fantastic job. So it's everyone else's fault for not being competitive enough. Is it going to be like this for the whole year? Yeah, I think it is, which is a shame. And I think next year again, you're going to see domination by Mercedes. People aren't going to turn a corner that quickly and make a difference, especially because they're all focusing on the new package for 2022. So we've just got to go with it and make the best out of the racing. I think the racing from P3 to P10 or P12 is fantastic. There's been such good battles, especially with the Renault, with the McLaren, with the Racing Point. That's been really good to see. If you took Mercedes out of the equation, Formula One has been fantastic this year. And in even a couple of races, they have challenged Mercedes, the Red Bull. So it has made racing fun. But, it is what it is. You've got to deal with it. And just, it's great to see so much good racing throughout the field. It's just a pity it's not right at the front.
I was going to ask you, when you're in the position of, say, Lewis or Valtteri this year, you're driving what's unquestionably the best car on the grid. Talk about how that makes you feel mentally in the context of 09. I'm thinking that first race here in Australia for Brawn, you know how fast that car is from pre-season testing. You're 0.6 of a second quicker than your team than anyone other than your teammate Rubens Barrichello. You're heading to work that day on that Sunday in Melbourne. Tell us about that feeling of knowing that you have the sharpest weapon in the field and the confidence that inspires, because that was the first time in your career you'd ever been in that position. Do you remember how that felt going to work that day in Melbourne?
Well, it's very different to what Lewis and Valtteri are feeling, because for us it was all brand new still. And we also didn't have a second. We were never a second quicker than another car on the grid. People just remember the Brawn year as, it was domination from the word go, but it wasn't. It was, the first race, I think it was 3 or 4 tenths. We were quicker than the other cars. And that's a big margin, but it's not a second. But also we went into the race with no experience of long runs, no experience of doing pit stops with this car. So for us arriving in Melbourne was, it was great to just be there on the grid, and qualifying went really well. We got the best out of it. And the race, we kind of lucked into the race because the cars behind us crashed. Kubica and Vettel crashed into each other. Quite a clumsy move. And that helped us because they were chasing us down at the end of the race. So it wasn't quite the same. But then sort of the second and third races, you knew if you did everything right, you could take the win. So that is a lovely feeling, knowing that you can always have a little bit in hand in practice, go out there and qualify and put it on the front row. It is a nice feeling. So I get it, but for them, it's a weird one because they are just racing each other. We had challenges coming in, like Sebastian Vettel was pretty much my main competition that season. There were some races where we were dominant, but other races where the Red Bull was dominant. So it was fun and exciting, and you didn't know what you were going to get that race, whereas they know exactly what they're going to get when they turn up at the race that weekend. It's just how close Valtteri is going to be to Lewis. That's all he's judging himself on, I guess.
Well, let's take a look at Lewis in particular, because obviously at the moment, only a couple of wins away from the all-time record. You'd have to say odds-on to equal the title record this season, and then probably next season break it if we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. You obviously had a front row seat, I guess, to seeing how he operates when you were teammates at McLaren. Back then, it did feel like a bit of a different iteration of Lewis, I guess. But did you see him going as far as he has now?
People were always saying that, they were surprised he was a one-time world champion at his time at McLaren. And yeah, I agree. He's an extremely talented driver. He has found himself in the best team, and it's the only team that's won a world championship since 2013. So he's got to beat his teammate, basically, and he's done a very good job of beating his teammate. I wish that there'd been more competition for Lewis over the last few years, because we see him as an ultra-talented individual and he's achieved so much. But I'm sure even Lewis would love to have more competition out there. I think it means more to you when you win a world championship if you have competition from other manufacturers, other teams. I would love to see him going up against Max Verstappen for a world championship. And I know he feels the same, and the same with like Charles Leclerc and a few other greats in the sport right now. But yeah, you can't take it away from him. He's done exactly what's been asked of him, and he's won 6 world championships. 7 almost.
We can play this at the end of the season. It'll still be like a really relevant sound grab. So good that we've got both in there. Look, more competition, of course. Everyone, you'd be forgiven if you were tuning in today and wondering if anyone could beat Lewis, how high a level he's performing at. Only 2 drivers over a season have beaten him, Nico Rosberg, of course, and yourself, JB, and over your course as teammates with him at McLaren. If you could give Valtteri Bottas some advice as to how to become a driver capable of beating Lewis Hamilton, what would you give him?
Well, I think Lewis has grown since we were teammates. He's found himself in a very comfortable situation. He knows he's quick and he's learned what's been needed of him in terms of working as a team player, understanding that you can't just drive the car as fast as you can every lap of the race and every corner of the race. You have to think about getting from A to B as quick as possible. And whether that's saving tires in a certain point of the race, saving fuel, the recovery system, what have you, there's a lot to learn. And I think he's learned a lot since we were teammates. So it's difficult for me to say. Lewis is a very straightforward driver, which it's impressive to see. He never plays games, which is awesome. It really is. Most drivers do, and I have played games. I think you have to when you're up against someone like Lewis. Fernando, when we were teammates, oh wow! I mean, it was just games back and forward the whole time, and no one ever saw it. And things that we probably can't ever talk about, but it was fun. It was actually really enjoyable, and that's what kept the excitement there. But with Lewis, he's straightforward. He's just really quick. So it's really difficult when you come up against someone like that. And I guess the only thing that Valtteri can do is really get the team behind him and be a real team player. And that's what really hurt Lewis when I came into McLaren, was that it was Lewis's team. Basically, he'd won the World Championship with them, and the only way that I knew that I could have equal treatment was to spend as much time with the team as possible. And make sure that I was part of that team as well, and they respected me as much as they did Lewis. And then you just got to go out and just hammer him every race. The thing is with Lewis though, it's difficult because you beat him in one race, you're really chuffed with yourself, and you see his head drop, and it's like, wow, I've got him. His head's dropped, and then the next weekend he comes out and blows you away. It's like, I don't get it. I'm not. I wish I could get inside his head and really understand him as an individual, because most drivers aren't like that. I don't know why that is. I don't know how he can shut down that negative feeling and negative views that he had the weekend before, and suddenly the next weekend he's blowing you away and he's a completely different person. So. Yeah, it's interesting.
JB, I did want to talk about one of your other former teammates. You were with Sergio Perez in 2013 when Lewis made the move away to Mercedes. Checo's obviously a vastly experienced driver now, and certainly much more ready for a team fighting for top results like Racing Point now are. Put you in the shoes of running Aston Martin for next season. Is he part of your driver lineup? And who of the other available options might you want in the other pink car, given that it seems to be... the pink Mercedes seems to be pretty quick this year. We've got a few candidates. Who would you like as part of that lineup if you're running that team?
Well, if I'm running the team, I'm Stroll's dad, so I would put my son in the car.
That's kind of what I was getting to.
I really feel for Lance, because it's not an easy position to be in. He knows what people think of him. He's the gifted driver that his dad has basically bought a team for him. So in one way you can say, oh, he's so lucky, but I don't think he's lucky at all. I feel for the guy, because there's so much pressure put on him, and everyone thinks he's in Formula One because of his father, but he's achieved, he won everything on the way through to Formula One. He's put in some fantastic results and drives. Barcelona, he finished 4th. He beat Checo. He did a great job, and then he has many times, and the consistency isn't there. Whether he's enjoying it himself or not, I don't know. It's very difficult to tell with Lance. But I feel he's actually doing he 100% deserves to be in Formula One. Has he had more opportunities than others? Yes. But I think that's put more pressure on him. So fair play to him. Checo, yeah, great driver. For me, Checo is the one driver that stood out to me as being an overachiever, really. I didn't think he was as quick as he was. And when we were teammates, he wasn't the most consistent in terms of he wouldn't go to every race and be quick. Some races he would just arrive, and like Bahrain, he was so fast. And I don't know if he understood why it was so fast, but he was so quick. But other circuits that didn't suit his style really hurt him, like Shanghai when it's a front limited circuit. So very unusual driving style that suited certain tracks and not others. And I don't know if that's still the case for Checo, but extremely quick, a real fighter. I think he's grown as a driver. He's very confident in his ability. He understands the bigger picture, what he needs to do. It's a long season. And we saw that in Austria, I think. Couple of moves that people made on him, he probably gave up. He gave up quite quickly with the maneuvers into turn 2, turn 3, whatever it is, at the top of the hill. But I think it was the right thing to do. So he's thinking about the season. He's thinking about points. So I would put him in my car as well. Apart from that, I think Nico did a great job at Silverstone. I'm very impressed with his second weekend. I think the race probably got to him a bit, just no experience working with these tyres with that car this season. Sebastian Vettel, 4-time world champion. It's easy to forget what he achieved because it's been a tough season for him. But he hasn't forgotten how to drive a racing car. He's just not in the right environment. And I know from not being in the right environment that it can get you down mentally. Formula One is more of a mental sport than it is a physical sport. And you got to be in the right place mentally. Every driver on the grid's pretty awesome in F1. And the way that you get one over on your teammate is through having a stronger head, basically. So he's in a bad place. And I think that if he had a new environment, we could see the great Sebastian Vettel back again.
Let's talk about that situation with Ferrari and Vettel as well. Ferrari obviously decided some point over the very long off-season we had that they didn't want to renew terms with Vettel, and what's happened since seems like a pretty big sort of devolution of that relationship, if you like. Are you surprised how poor it seems to have become, and can you see a future in which that relationship actually packs up early before the season is finished?
I don't think it will finish early. I don't know who they'd put in the car because they can't go and grab Sainz because McLaren won him. So, to finish the season at McLaren and score some points for them. But it is disappointing to see a fellow driver. We raced together for years, we were competitors for years in the sport. To suddenly see him shot down like that from his team that he's scored multiple wins with and challenged for world titles with. I felt that they should have at least talked to him. They say it was a financial issue, that he would have asked for too much, but they never had the conversation with him. So how do they know that? I think they should have been truthful. And, I think Sebastian would have understood if they turned around and said, you know what, the future, we want to go with someone younger and start a new relationship with someone for the future, because you might not be around for many more years. And he would have gone, well, it's upsetting, but it is what it is. You deal with it. But the way that it was handled was unfortunate, and I think they understand that now, Ferrari, and I think they've been apologetic, which is good. But that's definitely hurt him, and I think Sebastian can be quite delicate in certain ways, his character, and I think that's mentally hurt him quite a bit. Not feeling wanted in the team. We've seen it before with many drivers, and it definitely hurts. And that's why I think if he was in a competitive car or just in another team, confidence would be back, and we would see an awesome driver again. He hasn't lost it. He's a 4-time world champion. There aren't many out there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not. It's interesting. He was the first domino in this pre-season driver market chaos. It wasn't even during the season, and part of that was the news that Daniel Ricciardo would be heading to one of your old addresses in McLaren from 21. That seems like a team heading in the right direction, and I think being able to attract a driver of Daniel's calibre is evidence of that. Do you feel that move there is good for both parties? And I think Formula One's actually missed Daniel at the front because he injects something a little bit different at the front of the field. Do you think that's a partnership that can work?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was massively surprised by his move to Renault. I would love to have seen him in a Red Bull the last couple of years and pushing Max. They would have pushed each other so much, and it would have been a great battle to have seen. And for many months, I didn't get it. And I even said to Daniel, I don't get it. I don't get your decision to move to Renault. And I'm sure he's questioned it at times, as you always do as a driver when you've stepped backwards. I know that he's paid a lot of money at Renault, but he was also being paid a lot of money at Red Bull. So I don't think it's a cash issue, the reason behind it. I think it goes back to the not feeling like equal with your teammate and not feeling wanted in the team. And I think that's the reason why he's made that move. Spent a couple of years there, and I must say, really impressed. I think probably more impressed with what he's done at Renault than what he ever did at Red Bull. You know, to have one over on Nico in his first year like that, I think is very impressive. Now we've just seen what Nico can do in a racing point. It shows his strength. So for Daniel to do that, very impressive. This move to McLaren, it's a make or break, I think, for Daniel in his career. He's still young, but you got to start moving towards a team that can give you race wins and hopefully fight for a championship. This is a point in his season that, it's an important move for him. And hopefully it pays off. You know, McLaren with the Mercedes in the back should be very competitive. It's just how competitive they're allowed to be.
There are a good few drivers in the field who probably deserve, well, almost most of them, you could argue, title contending machinery. Obviously, only two have them. I think Max is a really interesting example. Obviously, he's performing at an incredibly high level, has been for several years now. There are some kind of parallels, I feel like, between Max in the last couple of years and you in 2011. You're in a high-performing team, you're performing at a really high level, but the other guy in the other car is just somewhere else. Maybe it's just the car, a bit of a combination. They're very much in sync. Is that a difficult mindset to be in, knowing that you're pretty much at the top of your game, your team is performing really high, but you just can't close that last couple of percentage to the best car? Yeah,
well, in 2011, it was a good year for me, but Lewis still won 3 races. You know, whereas Alex is a long way off of Max. I mean, it's tough for him because now he doesn't have the competitive teammate, really. You know, he's out on his own. He's probably not able to progress as much because his teammate isn't where he is at in terms of pace. When your teammate's half a second off you, which he normally is, you don't tend to listen to his setup changes and his setup work. So you're basically a one-car team. So it's tougher. You know, he looks to the Mercedes, and I think it frustrates him. I think Silverstone was awesome. You know, what a great result. But then, like Barcelona, you can hear the frustration in his voice on the radio. He just can't challenge them because he doesn't have the car underneath him. So it's tough for him, but he's just got to do the best job he can with what he has. And you compare him to his teammates the last 2 years. I mean, he has just annihilated them. I haven't seen that in motorsport for a very, very long time. Probably back to the Ayrton Senna days and Michael Schumacher days. I don't think there's been a driver that's annihilated their teammate like he has for a very long time. So he is doing an exceptional job, and I would love to see him going up against Lewis in the championship fight. Those two, top of their game. It's what we want to see, but is it ever going to happen? I don't know.
It'd certainly box office if it did. Jensen, I did want to talk about someone who's not on this year's group, but will be coming back for next year, in Fernando Alonso. We touched on him earlier. Were you surprised that Fernando chose to come back after the way he finished up at the end of 18? And do we need to, because it's Fernando Alonso, disregard the fact that he's actually going to turn 40 next year simply because of the way he goes racing and his CV before now?
The age doesn't matter, I can tell you that. I'm 40. And, you know, I've been doing a lot of karting, a lot of shift karting, and absolutely loving it. And the reactions are there. The love for it is there. So, yeah, the fitness will be there. I don't think we need to worry about his age. I think with Fernando, it's an interesting one because he left the sport. It frustrated him in many ways. He couldn't be competitive. You think that motorsport, you know, other motorsport can compare to Formula One. You walk away excited about new opportunities. And he has had a lot of fun. He's obviously been in the best car in everything he's got in. Like for Le Mans, no real competition. IndyCar's been a lot trickier for him. But I think he's realised that there's nothing like Formula One. Nothing compares to Formula One. The competition and, you know, the it's the pinnacle in terms of technology and the way that the teams are working. So I think he's super excited to come back to racing, and I think you'll see a slightly different Fernando in terms of he will be more of a team player. I just hope that the guy that employed him isn't fired in a couple of years. Cyril, we'll see. But no, I really think that it's a good team for him as well. You know, he's got good memories from that team a long time ago now. It's like 14, 15 years ago, but it'd be a good team for him to help grow. And they're looking pretty strong, to be fair, at the moment. I think he'd be good, you know, in and amongst the midfield, front of the midfield. I know that Fernando's idea was to come back for the new regulations. He's not happy with the way it is. Mercedes all out in front and the racing not being so good because of the aerodynamic package on the car. But the new downforce and the new packages will be very different. There should be closer racing, and it should hopefully bunch the field up a bit. So that's what he was coming back for, but I don't think he could wait another year. So a year under his belt was probably a good thing going into the new regulations.
And finally, JB, just as we wrap this one up, we can't let you go without recording some memories about Melbourne. You've got a couple of poles from Melbourne, 3 great victories here as well, and your championship journey started here, of course, in 2009. I mean, you must have some pretty strong memories of Albert Park and the Australian Grand Prix here.
Yeah, it's been a lot of firsts for me. It's the first time I raced in F1. It's the place where I first got a pole position. No, it's not. It's the second place I got a pole position. That was Imola.
We'll take
Another
it.
Great circuit. It's close.
Yeah.
And obviously the only place that I've scored 3 victories. So it's been really good to me over the years. And I love Albert Park. I love Melbourne. So many great memories of just of being in Albert Park in Melbourne. You know, and the racing is like. A plus point, really. Great circuit. I had some good overtaking moves there, as well as the victories and pole positions, and great battles as well, which is good. And everyone just loves arriving to Melbourne. You know, we walk into the paddock in Albert Park, and it's just like, so just like a breath of fresh air. It's like, we're back, but look where we are. This is awesome. We're racing around a park. It's so cool. And we're connected to a city as well. So, you know, the great restaurants. And once the racing is done, there's a lot of fun to be had as well.
Well, you certainly had some reason to have some fun after a few races down here, of course. But look, Jensen, we could talk all day, but you've been enormously generous with your time. Been terrific to catch up with you, and a real treat for all our listeners down here. Stay well and stay safe, and thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, and hopefully we'll see you in 2021.
That's all for this episode of In the Fast Lane. Thanks for joining us, and a big thanks to this week's guest, Jensen Button. We'll be back next week to review all of the action from this weekend's Belgian Grand Prix at the legendary Spa-Francorchamps circuit, and we'll also be joined by another big-name guest from the world of motorsport. Until then, for Michael Laminato, I'm Matt Clayton. Join us next time for another lap in the Fast Lane.